The Halli Casser-Jayne Show airs Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern. The podcast's always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com.
This is a man's world. This is a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl.
James Brown, the godfather of soul. His celebrated song, It's a Man's World, written with fellow writer Betty Jean Newsom, the song recorded in April 1966. Well, a lot has changed since 1966. Is it a man's world? Today on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, we're going to take a look at all the changes in men's lives, and women's too, since that celebrated song was written. When joining me at my table is the author of an important new work, Peabody Award-winning and bestselling author, Jack Meyers, writer of The Future of Men, Masculinity in the 21st Century. Jack Meyers will be with me in a moment. But first, welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. I am your host, Halli Casser-Jayne. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is brought to you by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Get a free audiobook and 30-day trial today by visiting my website at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and clicking on the Audible.com icon for your free book. Hey, what's more fun than a free book? And remember, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and a host of venues including Stitcher.com, Spreaker.com, TuneIn Radio, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, and on the iHeart Radio Network. As traditional gender roles disappear, many men are confused, conflicted, and challenged. After being told all their lives to be a man and man up, today's men are rejecting macho stereotypes, rewiring their emotional lives, and are more actively parenting. But are they also being left behind? A lean-out generation. Peabody Award-winning filmmaker and best-selling author Jack Meyers goes where no man has gone before when he explores the future of men, masculinity, in the 21st century in his new book of the same title. From shifting gender norms where women are generating greater income and more men stay home with their kids, to areas where women are growing in dominance, Meyers explores how the traditional roles of men and women are becoming blurred and what young men can do to find their place in today's new world. Meyers, founder of MediaVillage.com and author of Hooked Up, a new generation's surprising take on sex, politics, and saving the world, and several other books, is a recognized cultural visionary, award-winning documentary film producer, and advisor to hundreds of leading corporations on media and technology trends. His prescient insights and counsel make him one of the foremost global experts on the impact of technological advances on culture, society, business, advertising, marketing, and human connections. Is it a man's world? Let's talk. Wow, Jack, do you hear me? I have to say this. You've got, and forgive me for this, balls.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
It was meant as one to take this thing on. So let's start with this. From a woman with eggs, me, I think. What's the deal with men these days? They couldn't take the heat from the women's movement, so they got out of the kitchen, so to speak. I mean, how is it that in so short a time frame, men have allowed women to usurp so much of their power? as women took their power back, did that mean that men had to lose theirs? Is that part of the game here?
Well, there's a lot of perception of either or. It really shouldn't be an either or. There's a real sense that there's a growing backlash among men who are angry at women taking power away from them. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's many other things, and the primary factor is women gaining their economic independence and economic power, and a lot of the skills, competencies, capabilities that allowed women to be the nurturer in the home, the collaborator, the homemaker, works very well in business today as well, when manufacturing jobs are less than 10% of our economy. So there are a lot of dynamics, Halli, that have led to this, and we could go back into the last 60 years of the women's movement and that's impact as well.
I think we're going to hit on that just a little bit, but power. Let's frame male dominance, power, if you will, in terms of masculinity. Define masculinity in the 21st century. Is it a new definition?
It is a new definition. It's a transformational definition. You know, dominance comes from the origination back to the cavemen of the hunter, the gatherer. The woman stayed with the children in the home, nurturing the fire. The family all stayed together, and the men went out and hunted. Brought back the food and were the providers, and that history of men being the providers and frankly, men having the economic power, the physical power over women, and in many states and countries, that physical power was legal. And they had relationship power because the women were economically dependent on the men after marriage and had to stay in what they often considered to be unhealthy relationships. So now we're seeing a complete transformation. We're seeing, if you look at it in the context of history and you think of that we're in a 40, 50, 60-year transformation where we're seeing, let's call it, men moving from the driver's seat into the passenger seat, women gaining more dominance. Men have to reinvent themselves and how they perceive themselves and how they define themselves in ways other than being physically more powerful, financially more powerful, and in control.
Masculinity versus this word, machismo or machismo, depends where you're coming from. I think that's something we need to discuss. You say in The Future of Men that men are rejecting macho stereotypes, rewiring their emotional lives, and more actively parenting. I'd like to deconstruct that statement. Let me ask you this. Are men rejecting macho stereotypes simply because they can no longer get away with it? Or are they merely abdicating to women power? I mean, Jack, how much does this all have to do with the battle of the sexes? I mean, maybe men just lost the battle and maybe they are the weaker sex after all. Come back at me. Let me hear what you have to say.
Well, I think it's generational. Clearly it's generational. And there are a lot of men out there who will argue, and their wives, girlfriends, lovers will argue that men are doing everything they can to hold on to that machismo, that power, that sense of dominance, that control. And it's certainly in corporations where the vast majority of the C-suite executives are still running the companies. We've got that. So I don't think the women's movement would look at men and say they've given up their power. But we are looking at younger men in a very different way. Younger men who have grown up in, more than 40% of children are growing up in fatherless homes today and have been for the last decade. They're in schools where the vast majority of their teachers are women. For those young men who go to college, 60% of their cohort group in colleges are female, so they're in a female-dominated society there. And then they come out of college or come out of high school into the workforce, and 13 of the top 15 growth industries today in the U.S. are dominated by women. In fact, as many as 60 to 70% of the total employee base being women. So I don't think it's that they've given up or they've become less macho. I think it's that young men have simply grown up in a different way, in a different era where macho is not the defining characteristic. When so much of your social life is online and in texting, macho doesn't work there. That's why we had the sex thing and the challenges and problems we had with that because, boys were trying to exhibit their machismo online, and it just didn't work. And the repercussions are too powerful.
Okay, so let's talk generational for a second. Okay, we get the older, our generation, whatever it is. Maybe they can change a little, maybe they can't, but they grew up under different circumstances. How do you see these young guys today? What is their MO? If it's not machismo, are they feminine? Or what's out there?
A lot of them are, a lot of the positive male images out there now are what we grew up calling geeks and nerds. And you see the Bill Gates model, and even Mark Zuckerberg, would have in another day and age been considered a nerd. He still is a nerd, but that's not a negative anymore. They're growing up with more feminine qualities that the women's movement has been asking for men throughout history, to be more vulnerable, be more emotionally open, be more sensitive. At the same time, women are still looking for guys to be men when it comes to sex and interpersonal relationships. Boys are also growing up with inappropriate images in terms of how much porn they can watch on video, and they don't have a sense of intimacy. So while they're not learning from their dads intimacy, they're not learning from role models, and so they're caught in this crosshairs, this generational crosshairs, where they're growing up with one set of norms, and then they're coming into an adult world with a 20th century set of norms. I describe the younger guys as confused, conflicted, confronted by a transformation in society that no one is helping them understand or help them navigate their way through. So I think we've got a generation now that's so confused and conflicted that they're leaning out, that they're choosing to step away, as opposed to what Sheryl Sandberg's been calling women to do, to lean into their careers, to their lives, to their opportunities. Guys are so conflicted and confused, they don't know which way to turn.
Let's talk about this emotional rewiring. Is that a lot of it? That they're not able to? Because they don't have the role models, and we're speaking again of the younger generation. The older generation, I don't think, is as malleable for different reasons and in different ways. But are they able to emotionally rewire or not?
They are, and a lot of that comes because they've grown up online. And growing up online in virtual environments and social networks, they're learning to respond, react in different ways. They're learning the repercussions. They're testing out different models. They're seeing what works, what doesn't work. And while social media is still really in its infancy, Facebook and Twitter are only 10 years old, we're seeing that they're having enormous impacts on the way men and women, young people, communicate, interact, interrelate. And then we're also seeing it with online dating, everything from Match.com to Tinder, where relationships are completely being altered. The whole nature of who's dominant in the relationship, who is in control. Online dating, the women are much more in control than they ever were in if we want to call it the real world, the traditional dating world. So yeah, I think guys and women are being rewired and emotionally rewired. And I think it all stems from the internet and from mobile.
Do you judge it? Do you say this is good, this is bad?
I do. And I think generally it's good. I think it's positive. I think certainly the women's movement would agree, Halli, and I'd be curious to get your feedback too. But that the historic relationship between men and women has worked for a variety of reasons, but it's become increasingly unhealthy. 85% of all long-term heterosexual relationships that end today are ended by the woman. And that's because men have been more willing to stay in an unhealthy relationship because they have been in control and they have been able to go out and live their own lives at work. And now that women are out there, women are economically independent, women are better educated, they're less willing to stay in the unhealthy relationship. So we have 3 times as many unmarried middle-aged women as we did 30 years ago. We have a far more educated group of women than we did. There are 1 million more college-educated women than men, and 15 years ago, it was exactly the opposite. So there's this huge transformation that I write about in the future of men taking place in gender relationships, gender norms, gender expectations. And women are very clear about it. They're very clear about their self-identity, their independence, who they are, what they want in a relationship. They have their friends and the women organizations and the women's movement to support them. And men fundamentally have nothing at this point.
And I know you do.
The old boys network doesn't work anymore.
Right. You even talk about that in the opening of the book. But I want to ask you something that I think is more pertinent to what you just talked about, and that is this. I'm not sure that all women leave relationships because they're unhealthy. I think a lot of women leave relationships because they're not sure what the men are contributing to the relationships anymore. That, the roles have so, morphed and, they're so hard to define that what does a woman need a man for? If it's not for economic reasons any longer, right? Mm-hmm. Fathering children, well, you don't need them for that anymore because you can go next door and get that, and just on a loaner basis. I think a lot of women leave relationships these days, and my friends talk about it, and they said the reason that they leave relationships with men these days is because the men are like having another girlfriend. What's the point?
Oh, they wish they were like having another girlfriend as long as you added the sexual component to it. They wish they were as emotionally open, as easy to talk to.
No, I don't think that most women do believe that. I don't share that with you. I think that they still like men to be men. And a lot of them think that men are being wimps and they're not really a whole lot of fun anymore. And I think that's why a lot of women say, in the long run, I don't want to hang out with you because, what do I need you for? I got my girlfriend next door. We could go play. I think there is a component of that in this, no?
Definitely. You've summed it up incredibly well. And the challenges facing men, the important part of that is your comment that they talk to their girlfriends and they have their girlfriends and they can go next door. Who do the men have, first of all, to tell them what the women are feeling if they're not communicating it directly? And even if they do communicate it directly, the men don't have a GPS. I said earlier, it's like moving from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So when men were in the driver's seat, even if they didn't have directions, they didn't need to ask because they were in control. And of course, we know that men don't like to ask for directions. But there's, today, as they move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat and the women are taking more control, as you just described, over the relationship, they need a GPS. They need a guide. They need someone to tell them which way to turn. They need support. They're in the passenger seat. There's no GPS for them, and they're not in control, and they're confused and conflicted, and no one's giving them real guidance or direction. They don't have the men's groups, the way that the women have women's groups. In their corporations, they don't have women's organizations. There's not the clubs the way there are with the women, even book clubs. Men don't really engage very much in those types of activities. Yes, they may be in therapy, but often they're just trying to come to terms with their day-to-day and not looking at the deeper issues that relate to how they grew up, the messages they grew up with, the norms, the expectations of what is a real man. And then they're conflicted about what is it that the woman's really looking for, and they're not getting clear signals, clear messages. You talk about how women are looking at men as wimps and how they want men to be real men, but yet they don't want them to be the real men of, a few decades ago that were, quiet, silent, strong. They want them to talk. They want them to communicate. They want them to be a part of the process of opening up and being real in a relationship, being present in a relationship, but no one's teaching the guy how to do that, and no one's even telling him he's not.
Sisterhood. And that's what you're talking about. There is no brotherhood. There's no place for guys just to kind of hang out and have a conversation, except for a rare few that can get them through all of this. Let me just say this to you also. I don't think that men are all that happy with women either. I mean, I have a lot of male friends. They startle me sometimes with what they say and where they're going to find their relationships now. And it's not often with white men going to white women. They're going to Asian women thinking that they're less domineering, which they find out in the end, by the way, isn't true. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of men going off the beaten track because they just can't handle strong women, and they don't like strong women who must remind them of their mothers. Because I do think, and I'm going to go on this later, all men have the same mother, but that's a conversation we'll have in a few minutes. But do you hear what I'm saying?
I do. I wonder about men who have boys who are growing up with porn, with a tacit approval of strip clubs, of prostitution, of a lot of recourse when you're unhappy at home or when you're not getting the kind of macho feedback that you need, who really are never learning how to be intimate and never understanding that when you're taking your attention away from the woman you're with, the relationship you're in, that as opposed to working on your intimacy, to working on the communication, men need to really learn how to communicate their feelings more effectively. And the challenge we have, and this is certainly a challenge I had through much of my life, is it wasn't so much that I was unwilling to communicate my feelings. It's that I was so out of touch with my own feelings that I couldn't even understand what it was that was motivating me to act in certain ways.
And I have to ask you about that, because I have to say to you, you grew up in a home with a mom, maybe sisters, I don't know, but a mom for sure. You had women around you. Certainly, I don't get why men don't pick it up, because they grow up with a mother who they can watch and learn about intimacy and affection and feelings from.
Well, in my case,
missed that lecture.
My mom left for work at 2, and she started college nights when I was 9, and the last thing I was getting from my mom was learning how to be intimate and communicative. But those are the issues that a lot of young men who are, they're growing up with moms. A lot of children are growing up in fatherless homes, and the message they're getting from their moms is they're stressed, they're out working, they're trying to do in the home, they're trying to be all things to their children, trying to be mother and father. And even in households where you have 2 parents and children, and the parents are working full time, more than 50% of those homes, the woman is the primary wage earner. You've got far more, single parent homes with the woman at home than ever before. And again, girls and women are getting a lot of emotional support, even from advertising, like a girl and the commercials from Always and from Dove are very supportive, and we're seeing more and more messaging out there, less and less objectification. At the same time, boys are growing up with images in beer commercials of sexist and misogynist, of men having a cohort of other young men. They're seeing images in TV and advertising of men as idiots, where they can't even buy their own analgesic. And we're seeing Homer Simpson is the most iconic TV dad of the last 20 years. So
yeah, right. I hear you.
Us.
Yeah, no, I get that. It certainly is a tough time for guys. Gender equality. I want to talk to you about this. That's what this is all about, reaching gender equality. But Jack, listen to what I'm going to say to you. There is something weird in that, because maybe this shouldn't be about an acceptance of equality of gender, and we're playing semantics here, but you'll hear me out. But the answers might be to reach an accommodation to the other, or as the French might say, vive la différence, because shouldn't really all of this be about respect and accommodation rather than pitting each other against each other, which happens when the conversation is termed and framed in gender equality? It's kind of weird.
Early in my book, I dispelled to a certain extent the idea of gender equality, because it's human. First of all, it's human equality that we're really talking about. It's not just gender. But the reality is that there are always in organizations and families, there are the dominant, there are the less dominant, there are the people in charge. You seek equality, but you take certain responsibilities as your own, and you let other people in your organization and your family take responsibilities. The fact is, in 30 years, we're still going to have gender inequality, but in many ways it will be the men who are on the unequal side. And there are many arguments, some of which I make, that will be a positive in many ways. But if you look right now at women, childless, single women under 30 are out earning young men under 30. In some cities like New York by as much as 17%. We're seeing more and more women staying in their jobs, in their careers, because they're the primary wage earner while their husbands step back and take part-time jobs or jobs at home or become stay-at-home dads. One of the challenges is that, 15 years ago, we didn't call them stay-at-home dads. We called them out-of-work dads. Today, we still call them out-of-work dads. Even if they're choosing voluntarily to stay at home, we don't honor and reward and respect that as a choice. We consider it something wrong with the man. We never considered it something wrong with the woman if she was at home.
No, but there is a counter to that, and it is something I wanted to talk to you about, because one of the things that has failed in all of this, from a woman's lib and which was really about gaining choices for women. When women chose to go to the workplace, okay, fine. Those women who choose to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom, they are still, by other women, if by nobody else, are looked upon, frowned upon, like, what's your story? You're just, a Jap or a this or a that or the other thing. It's derogatory in nature. And I don't think we've come to terms with that yet either. That at the end of the day, what we're really talking about here is choice for everybody and equal opportunity to whatever choice one makes.
Both sides of that story, the man side, the stay-at-home dad side, and the working woman side, are really well portrayed. If you've seen The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, it really personifies a lot of the things we're talking about. And there's a great line where Anne Hathaway says to someone, "When did all the girls become women and the men become boys?"
I saw that movie and I just remembered I saw it. It's true though. It is true. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier with women today, it's hard for them in relationships with these guys because some of them do appear to be extraordinarily boyish rather than manly, which has its own, you can define that in 1,000 ways. So I don't want to put it out as macho
here's
equals
the thing
manly.
I recommend. If they perceive that men are becoming boys, what do you do? A boy is open to learning, is open to listening, can still be molded in a certain extent. So, instead of waiting for the guy to take the initiative, which, that's the way it was when I was growing up. The guy had to ask her out for the date. The guy had to be the aggressor. If the guy wanted to, get to first base, he had to initiate it. I think women need to actually start realizing that men are confused about what the right thing to do is. Is no, is no maybe?
Well, right, but
do you want to get thrown against the wall? or if I do that, am I going to be arrested or kicked out of school?
Just the other day, there was a whole thing about just this issue, and I don't remember where I saw it. Was on TV or I read it or something. And the fact is that statistics say that women still would prefer men. Oh, I know. It was on the Meredith Vieira show. I was watching it in the middle of the night one night, and they were talking about this very issue. And all the women and studies show women still prefer men to be the one to make that first move.
As long as they understand when that first move is unwelcome. And that's where it gets a little confusing
that's always
and complicated.
Been, right.
And you know what? I follow that. I believe in that. I think that's appropriate. I also think guys need to learn good manners, open the door, pay for a check, at least on the first and second dates.
Why?
The things that men have always done. But there are also those women out there who say that's sexist and misogynistic to think you should open the door or pick up a check. So that's where the confusion comes in. That's where the conflicting messages come in. And that's why I think women really need to be more aggressive, not in their actions, but in their communications about letting the men know what they like and what they'd like.
It's kind of sad that this is what we've come to, I have to say.
I agree with you. I think it's really sad that so many of the men who I say I've written a book about the future of men say, you mean we have a future? Or say, wow, that must be a short book.
I mean, right? I mean, the whole story, I don't know. You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is Peabody Award-winning and best-selling author Jack Meyers, whose book is The Future of Men, Masculinity in the 21st Century. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Hi, this is Halli Casser-Jayne. Are you enjoying the show? I hope so. And I hope that you'll tell your friends about it and help us grow our family. How can you help? That's easy. Share the link to the show with your friends or my show's player. And I would love it even more if you'd recommend they visit my website at hallicasserjayne.com. I look forward to seeing all of you there. Let me attack it from this point of view, because something else that you said in the book, you said the future of men will be increasingly defined, dominated, and controlled by women. Control. There is that word. Mm-hmm. Is that due to their abdication we were talking about earlier? Control. Won't that further alienate everybody if we define it in terms of control?
Good question. There is certainly that danger, and we're seeing in politics, and we're seeing in a lot of online communities an angry reaction by men against women. We certainly have a lot of those questions and issues, and that happens in any transformation. You have conflict, you have confusion. But I do think that we are heading into that reality, and that women are more in control. And I do think that this younger generation of men can be a great generation of young men. I think if we work with them, and where I spend most of the time, and that I hope the message that comes across from my book is one of hope, that if we respond, if we react, if we start paying attention, if we start building groups, if we start building job and career training programs, if we create better relief around college education loans, and support for college education, if we really look at the educational system from pre-K on through college and making it more male-friendly, if we look at testing models, if we really begin paying attention to men, then we'll have a situation where men and women will be balanced in control, where they'll be working and collaborating with each other, and they'll be on the same page. It's not a question of equality. It's a question of equal opportunity and equal openness for both men and women to be partners in a relationship, partners at work, partners in parenting. And right now we're really developing a lean out generation of young men who are opting out of families, opting out of relationships, opting out of education.
Scared puppies. What about women in this dynamic? Are women acting selfishly, only out for themselves? Is there something Machiavellian about all of this? Or are they out to wrench that control from their controllers? I mean, is this just another battle in the war of the sexes? Or is this truly a sea change in gender roles? I mean, there is that dynamic to put into this.
All of the above?
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were going to say that. No, but I think that they all had to be mentioned because I think that it's not as clean as we would like it all to be.
Yeah, there are certainly women's groups that are focused and are struggling with the fact that they're all women's groups, as they should be. But one of the things I advocate, for example, is in most corporations, leading corporations today, a little less than 2/3 of the new employees coming in are female. There are a variety of reasons for that, mostly around education and also the jobs, the type of jobs. But they're female, and there are support groups for them in the organization. There are women's groups, mentoring groups, guides. The men, on the other hand, when they come into that organization, are left out. There's no mentoring. So I'm encouraging corporations that have women's mentoring programs to open them up for young men and to let women mentor the young men. And let the young women also mentor the more senior men on appropriate behavior and do it in groups as opposed to one-on-one and individually. I think that'd be very healthy for corporations to break down these barriers and walls that they've created where they're supporting their women employees and providing no support for their male employees.
Okay, that's fair too. Here's another thought that I want to go with you before we get really into the workplace. Gender equality, which leads us to gender neutrality. Now I'm going off on a place here with you, so go with me. To me, gender neutrality is a scary term, okay? And I see a lot of that as happening. If we gloss over all of our differences in the name of equality and in fact start to take on components of each other, do we then all become simply ambiguous? I mean, I want to say neutered, but.
Well, if you go onto any college campus, you see, 15 plus, gender-based groups with, it's no longer LGBTQ. There are multiple more definitions of gender. Sex is still a male, female. It happens at birth and it's a more scientific definition, whereas gender is increasingly self-defined. And I think we have a lot of young women and men who define themselves as gender neutral, and sexual activity is not a part of their relationship. It's I know that there are a lot of people and young people who would be offended to be called he or she. They want to be called they or
the pronoun becomes the issue.
Yeah,
right.
and that's the I'm not sure, and I don't think any of us are sure how this is all going to play out in the future. How these relationships and these gender definitions evolve as these young people grow up and look for relationships.
Well, at some point, does it become right? But at some point, does it become that men don't need women and women don't need men, and then procreation is really the whole thing of
point? Yeah,
all right,
and certainly an enjoyable thing to
while you're having fun doing it,
so.
Right? Sure, I get that, but I mean, I guess in a way. One wonders if, this is really crazy, but it's a thought that has crossed my mind on a number of occasions, so I'm going to say it here, which is, are there chemicals in the air that our people are breathing that are affecting, all of this?
There's a geneticist named Brian Adams. He wrote a book called Adam's Curse, and basically the book focuses in on the last 125,000 years of masculinity and femininity, and it says that the male chromosome has been deteriorating for 125,000 years, while the female mitochondrial DNA has been very stable. So we're seeing a lot of stability in women, and we're seeing a kind of a destructive de-evolution of the male of masculinity. And
what's that about?
And he also points to the fact that there are 70 species now that procreate with the female only, the fruit fly and the dandelion, things like that.
Does he have a theory as to why?
His theory is that the male chromosome has been deteriorating
why?
And ultimately disappears.
But why? Does he know why? Has he written about why?
I'm not the geneticist.
Right, but I'm curious.
But
as long as we're here.
What he explains, he says it's like the copy machine that has a glitch in it, and every copy is a little different, and it moves further and further away from its originating source or reality, and becomes increasingly less connected to what it's supposed to be doing or supposed to look like. Because of this glitch, and he's saying the male chromosome has that glitch. It's like the moon, the pockmarked moon that's constantly being hit by meteors and is constantly losing its its original focus, its original center, its original core.
Well, I think it's starting to happen quicker than it used to. Listen to me, because I'm watching the clock and I want to get a whole bunch of questions still left in. But I do want to touch on this one thing briefly before we move on. And that is this, because something you raise in the book that I think is very important. And that is that women are educating themselves much better than men as doctors, as lawyers, etc. Mm-hmm. But men are becoming less educated, and blue collar jobs for men, think of this election 2016, are on the wane. What's this all about? What does it say about the roles of men in our culture today? What happens to them? I mean,
great question. A lot of it has to do with our early education, which has been pushing men to sit down and be quiet, not necessarily the most natural state for a woman, more complementary to women. Most of the teachers are women, and the whole educational model and system has been rejecting men for the last several decades. Boys are 50% more likely to fail math, science, and reading in college today. Boys are much more likely to drop out of school in order to get a construction job or some type of job that lends itself more to physical strength, and that where the pay doesn't really increase significantly from that starting point to 20, 30 years later. And the educational testing model also lends itself to girls. And this is not me talking. This is the educators and the experts talking about the educational system. But nothing has really been done about it. We need to redesign our educational system from pre-K up. That we need to introduce more gaming. We need to introduce more computers. We need to introduce more physical activity into the schools to engage the kids. We need to make it more feasible and acceptable for them to be in the drama club, for them to take courses in pre-nursing in high school, in the we used to call it home economics, in home courses, in home support courses. They shouldn't be mostly for girls and only for those occasional boys who are courageous enough to sit into those classes. We need to encourage, just as we're encouraging girls in the STEM categories, we need to encourage boys to enter the HEAL categories: health, education, administration, and literacy. And we're not supporting the boys going into those fields. We're not providing them with training and opportunities.
So I think we had to spend a little time on that, and I'm glad that we did. Here's another thing that I've got a whole list of other things, Jack.
Try to keep short answers.
I'm just like, oh my gosh, because I just think it's fascinating. And, you know, this is such a huge issue when there's so little talk about it, other than,
so
rolling
much
up
I cover in the book. So many different
right. And you do it well, and you hit on all the key points that need to be hit on in the future of men. So, that's why you're on the show, because I love this book so much. But hear me out on this thing too. I do think that we have to talk about the children, because we've touched on it, we've in a way, but with all the change that's going on, I think we have to be real. Everybody has to go to work, and some of that's choice and some of that's not choice. It's just the economy that we live in today, the society that we live in today. My point being that these kids who you're talking about, who are so lost, are lost because they're not being properly parented by a traditional two-parent home. You can get into whether that means two women or two men. I don't know. But, without getting into the politics of, gay rights and things like that, I just want to keep it with, normal families right now, because that's what the bulk of families are today. Talk to me about
let's
that.
Take the word normal out of that.
Well, that's a very good point, but you do know what I'm trying to say. Yes. So help me out if I've blundered. I didn't mean to, but I'm saying that these kids today are not the beneficiaries of this new sea change that's going on. I think that they're hurting, and they're hurting horribly. Talk to me.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it is sad. I have 3 grandsons. They're growing up in traditional homes, and I'm very happy for that, and I expect they'll stay in traditional homes. But we do have a reality that boys are being left with the role models in the media, while girls have many role models that they're being pointed to constantly. Who are the role models for the boys? Is it Donald Trump? Is it Homer Simpson or Peter Griffin from Family Guy? Where in the media do they have positive role models? Where in advertising do they have positive role models? Where in the schools? Where in the community centers, in the religious organizations, do they have positive, constructive, productive role models? And the role models themselves, the male role models, have grown up in this pre-transformational environment where real men were the traditional real men and don't even relate to these young kids who are growing up in a very different, more female-centric world. So I am very concerned, and what I try to do in the future of men, and hopefully succeeded, is propose some that create more awareness of this reality. It's not for me to recreate the educational system, only to point to the fact that our educational system has been doing a disservice to young people. Our media, television in particular, advertising, which is the industry that I came from, is doing a real disservice to our young people today, to our children, by failing to provide role models, by failing to provide systematic support through this transformational process to the young boys in the way that society, organizations, our educational systems are providing it to the girls and to the young women. And I think that's a very, very dangerous place, because ultimately it does create an angry young man, an angry boy who's confused, conflicted, and doesn't have a sense of where to turn or where to go for help or support. So he turns to behaviors that are inappropriate. He turns to acting out, and we see that in so many different parts of our society.
I'm going to disagree with you on one point, and that is I think that young girls also are affected by this lack of intact homes, or being shuttled off to daycare while their parents both have to go to work if they are in a two-parent home. I think all kids today are having a really hard time, and I think we're seeing this doesn't work quite the way it's supposed to.
And there's no argument against that, of course, but we do see 3 times more suicides among young boys. We do see a much higher rate of depression among young boys. So while certainly the realities are equal, the implications seem to be much more serious and the support as they mature seems to be much less focused on the boys. And I think that's been a healthy thing for young women and women in general. I don't think we need to take away from that in order to help boys and young men.
It's not all good for women or even young girls yet either. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But then let me ask you this, and I want a very brief answer on this because I think we should talk about it. And that is, does class structure have anything to do with this? If you're wealthy, if you're educated, if you're, it may not, and you get into, Fortune 500 companies and maybe life is a little different for you than it is for the blue collar worker, in terms of, navigating this new system. Just briefly, quick.
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot of the challenges facing young men exacerbated in the black community and the Hispanic community. We're seeing far less go to college, even those who go to college, far fewer graduating, much more difficult to get jobs, incarceration issues, lack of support for young people coming home from the military. But there's definitely a class issue, but we do have deadbeat dads at every economic level as well.
Okay. Are men, this is where I have to go next. Jack, are men inherently a mess? Talk to me. Have they always been a little bit messed up, but it was masked in the craziness and the guise of machismo? I mean, maybe we're just really starting to understand them as they really are if you take away the mask.
Well, I think most women would certainly agree that most men are messed up.
I'm asking you, the man, though.
From my point of view, I look at myself as an example of a guy I always thought I was a good man. I was in what I thought were healthy relationships. I had, children, healthy children. I had good career. I always supported women in my hiring. I worked for women. I started a women's group. I always thought I was a good man until I realized all the ways that I was not a good man, and that I was acting out in inappropriate ways that were destructive and harmful to my relationship, to my career, and to myself. And I think a lot of us men think we're doing the right things, think we're good. And then if you really drill down, and I do a lot of this in the first couple chapters of the book, really drill down into our patterns of behavior that we don't even realize are sexist, that we don't even realize are misogynistic, that we don't even realize are self-destructive, that take us away from intimacy. We really realize that, we kind of are a screwed up gender right now, and we need some fixing.
That's sweet. How honest of you. Darling. I don't know how we do that, though, right? And it ultimately becomes the woman's role to try and fix it. I don't know whether that be the girlfriend, the wife, the mother, the whatever. I don't know. It always winds up being the woman's responsibility at the end, and I don't quite get that. But, you do something in the book that I really liked, by the way, which is you talk to some women.
Yes.
And one of them, I thought, Katie Roberts, that she says that she wants, and I'm going to quote her son to grow up to be a stronger man than the foolish men she dates. The men, let me go for the men who lie, cheat, deny. Oh boy.
Well, my fifth chapter is deny, deny, deny men's destructive instinct to lie. And I think a lot of men, we learn it from the beginning. We learn it when we learn to, not to cheat in sports if we're called out, but we know if we're called safe, but we know we're out. The last thing you want to do is let them know that it's part of the game. Boys are taught, if you get in trouble, lie your way out. Girls are taught if you get in trouble, charm your way out. Tell the truth. So there's this fundamental core breakdown in a lot of the ways that boys learned what is a real boy. If you're hurt on the field, the sports field, and you start crying, you're told to man up, be a real, grow up. Big boys don't cry. Well, that's not true. And it's harmful when we continue those kinds of attitudes.
It's fascinating. I want to change quickly now to our political world. I was thinking this one, putting all this together today. I was thinking, Donald Trump vision. Okay. Take this in. Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders. Are we not talking about the difference between two styles of men?
Yep.
I mean,
we are, but they both have a core message that's resonating with young people, young men in particular. And we did a study among 1,500 young people aged 18 to 26. Men and women. And we asked them what their political preferences were and what the issues are. And girls told us that there are half dozen issues that are voting issues for them, starting with pay equality, pro-choice, LGBT, environment, jobs, and college loan relief and job opportunities. Guys told us there are two issues that are voting issues for them. Job opportunities, educational loan relief, and better educational opportunities. That's it. So the presidential candidates who focus heavily on jobs and job opportunities, educational loan relief, no matter what their partisan issues around gun control or pro-choice or LGBT or anything else or immigration, they're going to vote. Young guys are going to vote on job opportunities and educational loan relief. And that's going to be a really interesting contest to see whether they the nominees even care about young men, because one of the realities is they're looking much more toward women, toward Hispanics, toward the voting blocks, and young women have emerged a much more important voting bloc than young men.
It's a problem for Hillary in a lot of different ways.
It is a problem. In fact, she was number 2 among young men behind Donald Trump as the least likely candidate they were going to vote for.
Yeah. And I think that also plays into, I'm not sure that they're ready for a woman to control the United States of
I can
America.
tell you, young men, if she comes out really, really strong for job opportunities, education,
she can save them.
They'll vote for her.
Right.
They'll vote for her.
Yeah, but she'll have to morph in order to get those votes, which is, I think, also interesting. I wonder if this isn't all maybe a passing phase, or if we all simply haven't lost our sense of humor. I was thinking about this. I was thinking about these are such trying times economically and otherwise, and we aren't simply taking our frustrations out on each other rather than uniting to fix the societal problems that led to where we are today. We're not working together. We're taking it out on each other. And you know what I was saying? I was saying there were no Lucy and Ricky Ricarders in all of this. It's more the War of the Roses, where we've stopped laughing at ourselves on this issue.
Well, we have stopped laughing at ourselves, and because so much of what we're looking at is so frightening, whether, whatever your side politically, whether we're looking at the environment, whether we're looking at the terrorism, whether we're looking at, the issues related to choice. Young people have grown up with their whole lives being defined by political, adversarial, partisan issues. Their whole life has been defined by terrorism and the awareness of terrorism. This is a generation that was born in the early 90s and was just reaching awareness when 9/11 hit. They're a generation that is struggling economically. They're the first generation since the Great Depression to grow up not believing they're going to be more successful than their parents. So they look at the world and they'd like to have fun. They certainly, but sometimes, unfortunately, that fun has to do with going out and getting drunk or drugs and finding artificial ways to escape from reality. And when that doesn't work, it's a generation that increasingly has turned to suicide, and we're not treating it. We're not addressing it. We're not looking at it with the kind of focus that we need to be across all parts of our society. And what I really hope I've accomplished with the Future of Men is helping focus on the issue, whether it's the educational system, whether it's parents and families, whether it's government, whether it's media, focusing more on the realities that young people and especially young men are confronting without a lot of support.
You do speak to solutions in the Future of Men. You couch what you offer in terms of adapting to the gender convergence without sacrificing masculinity. So to all the young men, Jack, caught, as you say, in this crosshair between conventional definitions of masculinity and emerging behavioral expectations, who must also live, by the way, with the reality that women are genetically, as you just stated earlier, more stable, right? What is the one most important piece of advice you can leave them with as we close our conversation?
Understand that it's not them, that they're growing up in a transformational time where it's very confusing, where the conflicts are not about them. It's not about their own inadequacies. It's not about their own incapabilities. It's society and the times they're living in, and adapt, learn, listen, be open, communicate your feelings, and seek out the support you need, because there are those out there willing to give you answers. And make sure that when you're getting those answers that they resonate and feel good to you and right to you before you follow them.
I've been speaking with Jack Meyers, author of an important new book, The Future of Men, Masculinity in the 21st Century. For more information about Jack Meyers and his work, visit his website at jackmyers.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. Associate producer, Suzanne Probst. Music by Tony Rosales Jazz. Visit HalliCasserJayne.com.